Coming up on Midco Sports tonight, it's an NSIC football report. Minnesota State is still in the hunt for the Division II national title, and David Brown joins me in studio to talk about the Mavs. Then it's Coach Talk from USD. Bob Nielsen sits in with Jay Elson to recap the Coyotes' playoff win over the weekend. And finally, one of our favorite and most entertaining segments. It's another You Sit feature out of Grand Forks with UND Hockey's Rhett Gardner. All of that plus much more. Midco Sports Tonight kicks off right now. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I'm Kelly Stewart and this is Midco Sports Tonight. And today here at the top of the show, I'm joined by our NSIC expert David Brown. We're going to talk about what's going on in the Division II football playoffs, specifically with Minnesota State. So they squeaked out a 16-13 win over CSU Pueblo. And then last weekend, they
looked
did
a lot better.
I mean, 63-21 over Midwestern State. So how did the Mavs do it?
There's a reason it's a cliche and you get tired of hearing it, but they ran the football. It's just as simple as that. They had 502 rushing yards on the ground. Midwestern State had just 25. Nate Gunn, who was injured during much of the second half of the regular season, you see him right here. He looked like the dominant rusher we got to know in September and October of this season. 25 carries, 195 yards, 2 touchdowns. Justin Taormina, who shouldered most of the load in the back half of the season for Minnesota State, had 19 carries of his own and 134 yards. J.D. Ikoa, one of the 2 quarterbacks that they use, 8 carries, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. Minnesota State ran 90 total plays on Saturday, Kelly.
Oh my gosh.
75 of them were rushing, only 15 pass attempts. Normally when you establish the ground game, you often look for that to open up the passing game. Minnesota State establishes a running game to establish a better running game. They could not only ran it on the ground, they ran up the score on Midwestern State, but don't think of this as boastful or disrespectful. They knew the Mustangs had a high-powered offense capable of getting 40 to 50 points. Remember, in the Lone Star Conference, they averaged 48 points per game in the regular season, but the Maverick defense also did its job, Kelly. Midwestern State, they drove right down the field on their first possession. They took a 7-0 lead right away.
Oh, wow.
49 unanswered points from Minnesota State after that, and following that opening drive for a TD from the Mustangs, the Mavs held Midwestern State to 3 and outs on 7 of their next 8 possessions. The defense clamped down, they locked down. This is the Minnesota State Maverick team I thought was worthy of the top seed in the bracket. Mavs are in the Elite 8 of the D2 playoffs for the second time in the last 4 years. Very well deserved. A much better showing this week rather than the squeaker they had over CSU Pueblo in week 1.
All right, so scouting report. Minnesota State is going to run it, everyone.
I believe so. I don't think they're going to change anything up.
If it's not broke, don't fix it. But they're going to get another home game, right?
Yeah, and this is sort of an all's well that ends well type of situation, but the thought was Minnesota State was going to have to go on the road to face the number 1 seed Central Washington, who, as I've mentioned previously, I thought never should have been the 1 seed in the first place. And Central Washington, lo and behold, they end up losing the Texas A&M Commerce in double overtime. They blew a 21-point halftime lead.
Wow.
So much for being a number 1 seed, but again, my bitterness is still extending to this week. But again, Minnesota State, now because of that, they're going to host the region championship, which they should have done all along. But don't discount this Texas A&M Commerce team. Central Washington was still a great team in the first round. They topped Winona State in Winona, as you see from these highlights here. They have a great quarterback, does Texas A&M Commerce. In Luis Perez, he's capable of putting up some big numbers. The Mavericks defense will once again have its hands full. But I think for Minnesota State, after that sort of sluggish win, as I mentioned, over CSU Pueblo, they needed overtime to beat them. They refocus, absolutely walloped Midwestern State last week with that 63-21 final. And now, of course, they have a little bit of extra momentum getting to play at least one more game at home in the quarterfinals. And depending on if they win and how the other games end up, they could have another home game in the semifinals. Championship, of course, is in Kansas City, Kansas, but at least one more home game, possibly 2 for Minnesota State, which, as I've mentioned many times, they should have had all along. But good for Minnesota State. I'm happy for them. I'm happy they're proving both the committee and to everyone else that they're one of the best teams in Division II.
Yeah, happy for the Mavs. And Kansas City, not too far away.
Not too far away. They played the 2014 National Championship there. They lost 13-0, but they're trying to get back there, exact some revenge, and try and right the ship, if you will.
All right, well, they're doing well, but let's touch on another NSIC team. It's been about 3 weeks already, but Minnesota-Duluth, the Bulldogs, finally get to play their final game of the season, the Mineral Water Bowl, and that's coming up on Saturday. So how does that game look?
Well, the Mineral Water Bowl is usually a battle between the NSIC and the MIAA. The Bulldogs, they're 9-2. 2. They're going to face Central Missouri 8-3 from the MIAA. As I mentioned, the matchup is always between the two teams in the MIAA and NSIC that were just short of the Division II playoffs. And the NSIC has proven itself over the course of this matchup to be the better conference in recent history. They've won 5 of the last 6 Mineral Water Bowls. That includes a Minnesota-Duluth win in 2015 over Fort Hays State. I just happen to believe, even with my bias of knowing the NSIC a little bit more than the MIAA, that Minnesota-Duluth simply has the better team than Central Missouri. They faced more quality opponents if you've looked at their schedule, and they're entering this bowl game on an 8-game winning streak. And I can think of nothing better than for the Bulldogs to win this game over the Mules and get some momentum heading into the 2018 season. Also send out their seniors with something nice. It couldn't have been easy for them battling back from that 1-2 start when they lose at home to Minnesota State and Sioux Falls, but they've done just that. And I know the goal, it's always to make the playoffs, but how UMD plays in this game specifically, Kelly, it can go a long way toward continuing to cement its winning culture that's been around since Bob Nielsen won 2 national championships within 10 and 8 years ago. They didn't reach their ultimate goal, Minnesota-Duluth in, but they kept fighting all season long. That's something to be commended for this team that, again, historically has been one of the upper echelon teams in the NSIC. The Mineral Water Bowl, some players may say it's not the Division II playoffs, but again, considering where they started and how they battled back and how they were so close to making it, has to give them confidence going into the future.
Well, and just another opportunity to suit up with the guys to play another game.
Absolutely. They got 3 weeks off. The body should be well rested. Should be a good game against Central Missouri on Saturday in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, the Mineral Water Bowl.
Oh, well, it looks like it won't be as cold as that Bemidji State game.
It will not be as cold as that. Nothing can possibly be as cold as that game was.
All right. Well, I love football, but we got to talk some hoops because I love that more. But
well,
NSIC,
I wonder why you love it more.
I don't know, but NSIC basketball conference play already started this past weekend. So is there anything kind of noteworthy that happened?
Well, obviously, we're still 3 months away from the conference tournament. A ton can change. It was just the opening weekend. But the one thing that caught my eye and that I was really impressed with was Sioux Falls men's team, an overtime win over Southwest Minnesota State this past Saturday, 91-85. SMSU, they're the reigning conference tournament champions. They went to the Sweet 16 last year in the Division II playoffs. They brought back tournament MVP and South preseason player of the year, Ryan Brueggemann. And USF held its own and won a close game. Close games, Kelly, were the Achilles heel for Sioux Falls last season. 2-8 in games decided by 3 points or less. And those 2 wins were each by 3 points. So if you lower the threshold to games decided by 2 points or less, literally a basket, they were 0-8. That's such a mathematical and statistical outlier. It's honestly mind-boggling. Chris Johnson is a fantastic coach, regardless of the wins and losses on his resume. That 0-8, again, a statistical outlier that surely won't be repeated this season. The Cougars always seem to have a player or two every year who can step up in big moments, and continuing from last season, that guy is Drew Gieber. You might have heard of him. Twin sister Maddie plays at South Dakota State. Drew Gieber, he got all the hype. He's 6'8", career high 36 points. And again, him and Madison, they're both dead-eye shooters who can light up a scoreboard at any time. Sioux Falls has to be feeling good about this critical early season victory over Southwest Minnesota State. Gives them a little bit of momentum. They were picked in the middle of the pack of this conference in the NSIC. Southwest Minnesota State was picked 8th in the conference last season. They rode all the way to the top, NSIC Tournament Championship, and making it to the Sweet 16, as I mentioned. USF could be that surprise team on the men's side. Again, they have Drew Gieber. They have a lot of returning experience. And Chris Johnson, to me, one of the more underrated coaches in the conference. A good opening weekend win for Sioux Falls on Friday.
All right. Well, the Gieberts can definitely shoot it. I didn't know they were twins.
They are twins.
I didn't put that together. I guess I could have looked at
they're both juniors. You didn't figure that out?
Oh,
well, I guess they could have been cousins. I had no idea. And the other Giebert's going to South Dakota next year.
Exactly. Interesting.
You need to know the Giebert family a little bit better.
I guess. I got to ask my former teammate, Sam Mayer. She coached him when they were all younger back in Egan. But basketball this Friday, actually, a doubleheader in Marshall. So tell us a little bit about that.
Upper Iowa, Southwest Minnesota State. This is a rematch of the NSIC Men's Tournament Championship from last season, so you'll get to see if the Mustangs can bounce back from that loss to Sioux Falls that they had over the weekend. Upper Iowa still has a lot of great returning players. Carson Parker returning for Upper Iowa. Last time they were in Marshall, he had a 3 in overtime at the buzzer to beat SMSU. Upper Iowa won both regular season matchups last season, then lost the tournament championship on the men's side. And then on the women's side, these were 2 teams that performed a little bit below expectations last season, trying to ride the ship. Each team has really good players. SMSU has a lot of roster turnover. We'll see how that matchup goes, but it should be a fun doubleheader. 4 and 6 p.m. new times because of the Central Region Volleyball Tournament, but 4 and 6 p.m. in Marshall on Friday.
All right, live right here on Midco SN. Thanks so much, David.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, when we come back, it's more football chatter, this time from the FCS ranks. Jay Elson sits in with USD's Bob Nielsen to talk about the Coyotes' playoff victory over the weekend. This is Midco Sports Tonight.
Midco Sports Tonight, presented by Avera Orthopedics.